Western governments claim to be democracies, and in fact, they often try to justify their intervention and meddling in the internal affairs of foreign countries by claiming that they're defending so-called democracy. But a series of recent events in France demonstrate how many Western governments are in fact anti-democratic and in reality are oligarchies that only serve the rich at the expense of the vast majority of the population. Now, France is currently governed by the president Emmanuel Macron, who is a multimillionaire banker who is popularly known as the president of the rich. He comes from the center-right, and his constituency are the oligarchs of France. In June and July, France held new elections, and Macron's center-right bloc lost those elections. In fact, a left-wing coalition got more votes than any other party or grouping. However, Macron has made a de facto alliance with the far right and has appointed a right-wing prime minister from the Republican Party, which won around 6% of the vote in the election. They came in fourth place. They were the losers of the election. And yet Macron chose a right-wing politician from their party in order to form a new government, blocking the left from coming to power, essentially stealing the election. I'm going to talk more about this scandal, which some French politicians are referring to as a coup, that the French leader has carried out a coup. But that's not the only scandal that I'm going to be analyzing today. I'm also going to be talking about the French government's arrest of the CEO of the popular media app Telegram. He is a billionaire named Pavel Durov, and there are very strange circumstances surrounding the arrest of this billionaire who has multiple citizenships, but he's also a citizen of France. He actually had met with Macron many times, and Macron had personally given him French citizenship. So this is a very strange situation, but it also demonstrates how Western governments are cracking down on civil liberties and trying to prevent their own population, their own citizens, from having access to alternative sources of information. This, of course, comes after the French government and European governments banned Russian media in the West and have essentially tried to maintain an iron grip over their citizens' access to information. These controversies show how Western governments do not actually care about democracy. In fact, they only care about maintaining their hegemony and acting on behalf of the rich billionaire capitalist oligarchs who fund the politicians in the West, and then Western governments make policies on behalf of those oligarchs. This is not democracy if we understand democracy being ruled by the people. In reality, what we see in the West is plutocracy, rule by and for the rich. Macron is the perfect symbol of this. There's a reason he's known popularly in France as the president of the rich. He got his career started as an investment banker working for billionaire oligarchs. And ever since becoming president in 2017, basically all of his policies have served the rich, a small handful of elites, at the expense of the majority of the French population, of the working class. One of the first things that Macron did after coming to office is he ended a wealth tax on the rich. And given this, it should come as no surprise that Macron is very unpopular in France. A poll in May found that Macron's approval rating was just 26%, one-fourth of the population. And if you look at surveys from the past few years, you can see that Macron has not had the support of the majority of the population. His approval rating peaked in 2022 with the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, but it peaked at only 40%. Even then, at the highest point, the disapproval rating was over half the population. And his approval rating has continued to fall drastically since then, especially in 2023 when he rammed through undemocratic legislation, forcibly increasing the retirement age without a vote. This led to massive protests with millions of people on the streets condemning the banker president, the president of the rich, for cutting taxes on the rich while increasing the retirement age. And some people like to make fun of the French, claiming that they're lazy and they're always protesting, and that it was reasonable for Macron to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64 because it was too low. But in reality, this comes at the same time that he has been cutting taxes on the rich. He eliminated the wealth tax, and even Forbes acknowledged in an article, quote, "France's rich get much richer after abolition of wealth tax." So Macron says we have to raise the retirement age and cut social programs for working people because we simply don't have the money. But in reality, they don't have the money because he's cutting taxes on the rich. And the inequality in France is becoming more and more extreme. In fact, 50% of the French population lives on less than 1,930 euros a month after taxes, meaning that they make about 25,000 US dollars per year. Meanwhile, the average 50 square meter or 530 square feet apartment in Paris costs 2,000 euros a month to rent, meaning that half the French population cannot even afford renting an apartment, a modestly sized apartment in Paris, yet alone buy one. The average apartment of that size in Paris costs 500,000 euros. So it's not like the average French person is living this crazy, unreasonable life of luxury and they simply protest because they're lazy. A study that was recently published shows just how insanely wealthy billionaire oligarchs have become in recent years in France under Macron and his center-right neoliberal allies. This study looks at the wealth of the 500 richest families in France. And in 1996, the 500 richest families in France had wealth that equaled 6% of the country's GDP. As of 2017, the 500 richest families had wealth equaling 20% of France's GDP. As of 2022, the 500 richest families in France now have wealth equal to 45% of the entire country's GDP. I need to emphasize this point. This is incredible. The 500 richest families in France now have wealth that is nearly equal to half the value of all of the goods and services produced in the entire country in 1 year. And that has exploded since 2017 when Macron, the banker president, the president of the rich, came to office. In my reports here, I talk a lot about the US capitalist oligarchs who have taken over the government and basically run society on their behalf. People like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg. But France also has its own billionaire capitalist oligarchs, including some of the richest people on earth. As of 2023, these included people like Bernard Arnault, who has around $200 billion of assets. Also, Françoise Bettencourt-Meyers, who has nearly $100 billion worth of wealth. The Wertheimers, Pinault. There are many other families that have tens of billions of dollars of wealth. In fact, the French billionaire oligarch Bernard Arnault recently overtook Elon Musk to become the richest human being on Earth. Arnault had a wealth of around $233 billion, according to a recent report in Forbes. Of course, given market fluctuations in the value in the stock market and other assets, sometimes that evaluation changes. But the reality is that he's among the top 5 richest human beings on Earth. A lot of people probably haven't heard of Arnault, but they have certainly heard of his company. He is the chairman and CEO of LVMH, which is a luxury goods company popularly known as Louis Vuitton. And in addition to Louis Vuitton, LVMH owns many other luxury brands like Hennessy, Tiffany, Dior, Marc Jacobs, and many other luxury brands. And the fact that this company, which is their clients are exclusively the rich, the fact that they are doing so well while many countries are entering recession and there are fears of a global recession, this demonstrates the fact that these oligarchs, these big, powerful capitalists around the world, their lives are getting better and better as they get richer and richer at the expense of the working majority. The working class is getting worse off and worse off. And it should come as no surprise that Bernard Arnault, one of the richest human beings on earth, is a huge supporter of Emmanuel Macron. Back in 2017, when Macron became president, this billionaire praised him, and he complained that before Macron was president, quote, corporations were ostracized from society, end quote. Absolutely amazing. I mean, these billionaire capitalist oligarchs who control everything, they have such a victimhood complex. They always think that they're the victims, everyone else is out to get them, while they suck up the wealth produced by workers everywhere. And of course, this billionaire oligarch Arnault praised Macron and said that Macron shares our vision and he will bring more investment and more growth in France. Well, we've seen in the past 7 years under Macron that all of the investment and growth has gone to benefit billionaire capitalist oligarchs like Arnault. And in fact, in March 2024, Macron invited a bunch of billionaire oligarchs to Paris to receive awards. Among them were Elon Musk, who had a one-on-one meeting with Macron, also Beyonce, who is extremely wealthy now, and, drumroll, Bernard Arnault, who was the world's richest man. He was invited as a guest of honor to this party, and Macron gave him France's highest honor. And of course, while this is all happening, these billionaires are demanding that Macron implement political decisions on their behalf. There have been reports in mainstream corporate media discussing how Arnault was lobbying Macron to pick a prime minister that he liked, and certainly not to allow anyone remotely on the left to become prime minister in France. So this brings us back to the election that was held in France in June and July. Macron personally called for these elections, and his center-right party, the bloc known as Ensemble, they lost the election. And who came in first place? A left-wing coalition known as the New Popular Front, which won more votes than any other bloc. In third place was the far-right coalition under the party National Rally, which used to be known as the National Front, led by Marine Le Pen, who is the daughter of a Holocaust denier and a notorious apologist for Nazi-occupied France. She has tried to distance herself from her Holocaust-denying fascist father, but he founded her political party that she became the leader of, and it's well known that she is linked to very far-right extreme forces in France. Her party came in third place, and then below them was the Republicans. This is the traditional right-wing party that had governed France. If you know, for instance, the former French president Sarkozy, he came from the Republicans. They were decimated in the election. The Republicans only got around 6% of the vote. However, Macron decided to appoint as prime minister the politician Michel Barnier from the right-wing Republican Party that only won 6% of the vote. So this is a blatant violation of democracy. Macron and his right-wing allies lost, and yet he appointed the people who lost to rule the government. And in reality, what's happening here is that there is an unspoken alliance between Macron, the center-right, he represents the center-right, and the far-right, represented by Marine Le Pen, because her party has tacitly endorsed the appointment of this right-wing prime minister, Michel Barnier, from the Republicans, So he's essentially the consensus candidate between the center-right Macron supporters and the far-right Le Pen supporters. She is the one holding together this new government. So this is an alliance between the centrists and the far right to prevent the left, which won the election, from coming to power. And it's clear that Macron made this agreement in a private meeting that he held with the far-right leader Le Pen just a few days before making this announcement. The leader of the French left-wing coalition that won the election has openly said that Macron is stealing the election. Jean-Luc Mélenchon is a longtime left-wing leader in France. He's also very anti-war, unlike Macron, who of course is pro-war and pro-NATO. And Mélenchon published a video and he said, quote, Emmanuel Macron officially denies the result of the legislative elections. He has just appointed Michel Barnier, a member, among others, of a party that came last in the legislative election. And then he added, quote, Emmanuel Macron stole the election from the French people, end quote. And also a lawmaker from Mélenchon's left-wing anti-war party, La France Insoumise, she said that, quote, 52 days after the government was defeated at the polls, Macron continues to see himself as an autocrat. By appointing Michel Barnier, the president refuses to respect popular sovereignty and the choice made at the ballot box. Against this unacceptable democratic coup, she said, join us on the streets. And the left-wing party of Mélenchon has called for mass protests to defend the election against what they're referring to as a coup by the autocrat, the banker, millionaire oligarch, and president of the rich, Macron. Mélenchon and the French left are also calling for a vote to impeach Macron, and a poll, in fact, found that a slight majority of people in France, 52%, support a motion to impeach Macron. Again, 52% of the population want to vote to remove Macron from office. However, if you look at comments made by EU officials, who, by the way, are mostly unelected, you can see how blatantly anti-democratic the European Union is. The head of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, tweeted out congratulations to Michel Barnier on his appointment as prime minister. She said, I know that Michel Barnier has the interests of Europe and France at heart. I wish him every success in his new mission. Similar comments were made by Christine Lagarde, who was previously the economic minister of France, a neoliberal, and she also serves the billionaire oligarchs. She was previously the director of the IMF. She's now the president of the European Central Bank. She congratulated Michel Barnier. She said, we have known each other for many years. I am confident you will do an excellent job serving the people of France and Europe. What was even funnier was the statement made by Canada's centrist neoliberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He congratulated Michel Barnier. And what's so funny is he said that Canada and France share values of democracy and freedom. I know we'll work closely together. This is a complete farce. Michel Barnier is the opposite of a symbol of democracy. He's a symbol of authoritarianism. His party, the Republicans, the right-wing party of this right-wing politician, Michel Barnier, they lost the election. They get around 6% of the vote. They came in last place. But Macron, the oligarch-serving president of the rich, appointed Barnier, despite the fact that he has no democratic mandate. And in fact, in his first official remarks as prime minister, Barnier gave this very condescending speech in which he called the people from below. Just, you can feel the arrogance. And he's talking about the peons, the dregs of society, the poor people below. And the French commentator Arnaud Bertrand, who's a very good follow on Twitter, he noted that Barnier is, quote, the very caricature of a politician who is so entrenched in his ivory tower and so mired in his class contempt, end quote. Now, people might be confused how a politician whose party came in fourth place and only won around 5 and 6% of the vote, could actually become prime minister? Well, Arnaud Bertrand had a very good comment on Twitter explaining this. I'm going to read part of his comments. He notes that basically after the elections, the president, Macron in this instance, is free to choose who he wishes as prime minister if he doesn't like the results, and if he gets assurances that parliament will not censor his choice. I'm serious, that's how it works. And in this instance, Macron seems to have made some sort of agreement with Le Pen to ensure that there would be no censure in parliament. By the way, this is not just speculation. There were reports that Macron had these private meetings with Le Pen a few days before he made this announcement. It's clear that Le Pen and her far-right party are tacitly endorsing this. That's why the French media has referred to Le Pen and the French far-right as the kingmakers in Macron's new government. So getting back to this analysis by the excellent French commentator Arnaud Bertrand on Twitter, explaining how anti-democratic the French system is. He explained that what happened is that technically, a French president does not actually need to get assurances that parliament won't censure his choice of prime minister. He can basically appoint anyone he likes, but that would be pointless because then his chosen prime minister would be censured. So what's really happening here is Macron chose this candidate after making an agreement with the French far-right and Le Pen, who obviously gave their endorsement to Barnier and assured Macron that they will not censure him. So then Arnaud Bertrand asked, he said, so what's the point of voting if the president can just dismiss the results and appoint whoever he wants? This is exactly the question that many French people are asking themselves right now. Because even though all past presidents had this power to just dismiss the election results, this is actually the first time in the history of the French Fifth Republic that a president chooses someone as prime minister who is not from the winning party. And of course, the winner of the election was the left-wing coalition, the New Popular Front. They got more votes than any other party or bloc. However, they were denied being able to form a government in violation of this decades-long policy in France, this custom that Macron has violated. And the New Popular Front, led by the leftist Mélenchon, they had chosen a candidate for prime minister who comes from the center-left Socialist Party. She was not in any way a far-left firebrand, as the media often calls Mélenchon. They picked this very moderate consensus candidate. And what was the response of Macron? Absolutely not. We will not tolerate that. And why? Because Macron is the president of the rich. His constituency are the rich oligarchs, the millionaires and billionaires in France. And he doesn't need the support of the population, the working class. And Macron has made it clear that he doesn't care about democracy. He doesn't care that he and his allies lost the election, because this is what capitalism actually is. There's no such thing as a capitalist democracy. Capitalism is always ruled by the capitalist oligarchs. If you are rich, you can control the government. That's how the system works. It's a plutocracy. It's an oligarchy. It is not a democracy. And this is how all of these Western governments actually operate. They're not democracies. Yes, they have elections, but in those elections, the candidates are funded and essentially chosen by the rich oligarchs. It's the best so-called democracy that money can buy, which means that it's not democracy. Real democracy means rule by and for the people. This is not rule and by for the people. This is rule by and for the rich capitalist oligarchs. So they get richer, while the working majority gets poorer and poorer. And then finally, this brings us back to the other issue that I mentioned I was going to analyze today, which is the arrest of the CEO of Telegram, Pavel Durov. This is a very strange scandal, but it shows how the French government does not care about civil liberties. It does not care about the right of its citizens to have access to information through apps like Telegram. The French government has already banned Russian media. The European Union as a whole banned Russian media. You cannot get access to the Russian point of view They want to brainwash their populations and to continue supporting proxy war on Russia, a new Cold War. Now they're trying to start a new Cold War on China. They're sending billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine to fuel this war, which could cause World War III. And meanwhile, there's this very strange incident where the CEO of this app, Telegram, was arrested in France. But by the way, Macron had long supported this CEO. And in fact, the French media reported that Pavel Durov had repeatedly held private one-on-one meetings with Macron before Macron gifted him French citizenship. And what's even stranger about this story is that Durov told French authorities when he was being arrested that he came to France because he was supposed to have dinner with Macron. Macron denied that, but why would he make that up, that he was going to have dinner with Macron? This is a very strange story. So what's going on here? Well, for years, the US government has been trying to force Durov to allow it to create a backdoor in Telegram so Washington could spy on people around the world who use the app, which of course is popular. And in particular, Durov said that every time he visited the US, which he stopped doing, the FBI and other US spy agencies were asking him for him to collaborate with the US government. Now, you've probably seen in recent years that Western governments have criticized Telegram because it has been a source of alternative information, especially on the proxy war in Ukraine. A lot of sources inside Ukraine have leaked information that have been damaging to the Ukrainian regime and its NATO sponsors. And also confidential documents from Israeli intelligence and the Israeli government have been leaked on Telegram, and confidential information even from the US government. So Western governments have been trying to censor Telegram, and they want to use it in order to destabilize their adversaries like Russia. And this is the ultimate irony of this story, because Pavel Durov, in fact, was known for being a critic of Putin. He was not an ally of Putin. He's originally Russian, but he actually left Russia. And why is that? Because the Russian government had asked him to collaborate so the Russian government could go after people who are violating the Russian law, criminals who are using Telegram. And he said, no, I'm not going to collaborate with the Russian government because Pavel Durov is a libertarian, a billionaire libertarian who doesn't want to collaborate with any government. At least he says that. The irony is that he left Russia and then he went to France and he was collaborating with Macron. Macron gave him French citizenship. So a lot of people suspected that he was collaborating with Western intelligence. And now what happened? Those same Western governments arrested Durov. So this shows how you can never trust the West. They will say, oh, we're going to support you. We support civil liberties, but they don't. Whenever it's politically convenient for them, they will go after you. And what's ironic about this is that in 2020 and 2021, there were US-backed, NATO-backed protests in Belarus as a color revolution attempt to try to overthrow the president, Alexander Lukashenko, who is a close Russian ally. He's also been very friendly to China, and he's not a Western puppet. And he also has not privatized all of Belarus's state assets and has maintained a lot of public ownership in Belarus, which has frustrated oligarchs. There are basically no oligarchs in Belarus, unlike in Russia and in Western countries. So Western capitalists have been trying to get access to Belarus's resources and assets. So in 2020 and 2021, there was a US-backed color revolution attempt. It failed, but Telegram was one of the main apps used to try to organize the protests against the Belarusian government. And in fact, Pavel Durov and Telegram had tacitly expressed support for this color revolution attempt. And the protesters backed by the US, they were actually using a pre-Soviet flag, which was also the flag used by fascist Nazi collaborators during World War II, by the way. They were using a white and red flag instead of the actual Belarusian flag, which is red and green. And Telegram, in its show of support for this color revolution attempt, the Telegram app changed the Belarus flag emoji to this fascist World War II era flag that was used by the Color Revolution protesters. In fact, on Twitter, the official verified Telegram account, they boasted of adding this emoji to replace the red-green flag with the white-red flag. So this is the ultimate irony. Pavel Durov is not some kind of secret Russian agent. On the contrary, he was linked to Russian dissidents, anti-Putin activists, and that's why for years, the Western media was praising him. They called him Russia's Mark Zuckerberg. Western media outlets published articles talking about how he was the richest and youngest billionaire in the United Arab Emirates, which is also hilarious because Pavel Durov is basically a libertarian, and yet he moved to the United Arab Emirates and he became a citizen, an Emirati citizen. But what's so funny about this is the UAE is an absolute monarchy. They are a hereditary dictatorship. But he moved to the UAE, he became a citizen, he has $15 billion of wealth. He is the richest foreigner, or, now he's a citizen, but he's the richest foreign-born person in the United Arab Emirates. But because he refused to allow the US government to turn Telegram into a spy app, to put a backdoor in so they could use it to spy on people around the world, we now see the consequences. He was playing ball, but he wasn't playing ball enough, so they turned on him. The French government that gave him citizenship turned on him. He was arrested. He's now potentially facing years in prison. Of course, he's a billionaire. He can pay for the best lawyers in the world. I don't think he's going to go to prison. I highly doubt it. But this is the reality, is that you cannot trust Western governments. They are not democracies. They claim that they support democracy and human rights, and they claim that they support the right of the media. Of course, freedom of speech in Europe is a little different compared to the US. They don't have the exact same laws, but they still claim that their citizens have the right to journalism, the right of access to information, the right to constitutionally protected speech. But at the end of the day, if you're not obediently doing whatever they tell you, then you don't have rights. These Western regimes are not democracies. They are authoritarian oligarchies that are trying to defend their empires, their imperial hegemony, which of course is acting on behalf of Wall Street, of these Western oligarchs. That's why they're so desperate to overthrow the government of China, to privatize all of China's state-owned industries. They want to overthrow the Russian government and privatize Russia's state-owned industries like Gazprom. The Russian government owns many of its natural resources like its oil and gas. It owns some of the banks, which are state-owned. In China, all of the major banks are state-owned. They want to overthrow their governments and privatize all of that, just like they did in the 1990s in Russia under Boris Yeltsin, who was an alcoholic US puppet. And they are willing to violate civil liberties, violate laws, and overturn elections in order to defend the interests of the capitalist oligarchs that control their policy in the West. They don't care about democracy. We can see that very clearly in France. And these are just a few examples. There are so many other cases. But of course, this is already going long enough, so I'm going to conclude here. I am Ben Norton. I am the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. Please like and subscribe. Please share. If you like the work that we do here, exposing the Western oligarchy, please consider supporting us because unlike them, we have very few resources. We rely entirely on small donations from viewers and listeners and readers. We have no institutional support. We have no big donors. So if you like the work that we do, please consider supporting us. You can go to geopoliticaleconomy.com/support. There are several ways that you can donate. The best is you can go to patreon.com/geopoliticaleconomy. You can become a patron to help sustain our work, our original journalism and analysis. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. I will see you all next time.